Hi everyone, I'm Elena, and this is the Shift Happens F1 podcast. It's just me today in the studio recording, so this shouldn't be too long of an episode for y'all, but today we're going to be talking about the Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka. So, we'll start off right away with going over free practice. So we had FP1, which was, I think it was on like a Friday night at 10:30 p.m., which I missed that one and FP2 watching it live because I got my car towed, guys, which surprisingly I didn't cry. That was a win for me personally. I didn't cry when I found out my car got towed. I was emotionally strong and I got through it. But looking back, I had to watch it. So we'll go over what happened. FP1 had, I noticed RB had a rookie. His name is Ayumu Iwasa. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this. He was in Daniel's seat for FP1. He finished 4th place last year in the 2023 F2 season. So he's definitely someone who they're looking at right now. I think definitely, if you're in the top 5 or 6 with what you placed last year in the F2 season, like they're going to be putting you in those seats for the practice session. So he got a good one out. He managed to not crash the car. So that was a win for RB, and he did okay. He was about 2 seconds off the pace in practice 1. But the other interesting and only other interesting thing that happened in FP1 was that Logan Sargent crashed out. It is not looking hot for him to have a seat next season. I don't know if he will have one. So we'll definitely have to look at that further and hope that he can, it's only the 4th race. So, fingers crossed he can make it through. He took turn 7 really wide and lost all the grip on his car, and he basically spun out into the barriers. He broke off the entire front wing. It was actually a pretty big hit. The front of his car basically flew in the air for a little bit. He didn't partake in FP2 later that day. It's not, Williams has just been seeming to have some major problems with keeping more than one car on the track. And, we'll talk about that later too when we get to the race. On to FP2. There wasn't much happening this session due to it being rained out basically until the last maybe 5 minutes. That was when some of the teams decided that they want to put some cars on the track. I think that the finish, the top of the timing sheets was Piastri, Hamilton, Leclerc, and maybe 3 or 4 other drivers got out, but most of the teams, I guess, just didn't see the point in it and just decided to save their tires. There wasn't enough information to get wet laps out by the time that it kind of calmed down a little bit. Now onto the final free practice session, FP3. Also not much that happened. The only interesting kind of thing was Daniel spun out on the apex of turn 2, made some donuts in the grass and put himself right back on the track. But other than that, nothing out of the ordinary. The session finished with Verstappen, Checo, and Russell in the top 3 for the timing sheets. Free practice is one of those sessions where when I was starting to watch out, I was like, I would watch them anyways because I was in that honeymoon phase of F1 where it's everything was amazing and awe-inspiring to me. And don't get me wrong, I'm still kind of in that honeymoon phase, and I'm surprised I still am 3 years going on. I enjoy watching the free practice sessions and getting to sit down and I feel like they talk a bit more technical during these sessions. So for people who are interested in the more technical side and want to, I guess, maybe learn a bit more other than what they talk about on the race or qualifying, free practice sessions are really good. But if you're just an average fan, if you just want to watch qualifying and then the race, that's also perfectly normal. With free practice done, we move on to qualifying, which I live in Florida, America. So I'm on the East Coast. This was at, I believe it was 2 a.m. 2 to 3 a.m. was when this was happening. And don't worry, I actually was up for this. So gonna kind of go more a bit structured with Q1, Q2, and then Q3. So Q1 had Zhou, Sargent, Magnussen, Gasly, and Stroll out. Stroll seemed to kind of be struggling this week with his car and like the balance. I mean, compared to his teammate Alonso ended up placing really quite high in qualifying to start himself out on for the race. Stroll's just kind of, I guess he's been struggling a little bit. Didn't seem to be doing too hot in free practices. So on to Q2. So Ocon took P15. So Alpine managed to get one of their cars up into Q2, but you know it's never enough to get him past P15. It's just they don't have good enough times. It ended up being Albon in 14th, Bottas 13th, Hülkenberg 12th, and then Daniel 11th, which he was really close to Yuki. Yuki qualified P10 in Q2. I think they're about 55 hundredths off of a second of each other. And it was close for Daniel. It was kind of, he's having a hard time, I feel. Like, he spun out in, I believe it was FP3 I mentioned. And Yuki has just been outperforming him every weekend. And it's kind of, I mean, it's like sad to see because he's one of those people that you love so much and you want him to do well. And it is so hard being a Daniel Ricciardo fan. I think I mentioned it in an episode earlier. But it's just like every time you're in it and you're in his corner and then something happens, and it's like being a Ferrari fan. Being a Daniel Ricciardo fan is like being a Ferrari fan. There are a few elational moments where you are in euphoria, you're on a high, and then you have to come back down to reality because it was a one-off. But we'll go into more Ferrari later because they're doing something this season and I don't know what it is. But on to Q3, it ended up being Verstappen P1, Perez P2, Norris 3, Sainz 4, Alonso 5, Piastri 6, Hamilton 7, Leclerc 8, Russell 9, and Tsunoda 10. You heard me right when I said Leclerc 8th. Leclerc placed really low due to him. I guess the team just ordered him to stay in the pits during the last couple minutes of Q3. He got out a couple lap times. And I guess they just decided to keep him in, or they thought at least he would do better than P8, but he didn't, and it's whatever. He managed to pull himself forward during the race. So Norris had great lap times, though, put himself in the best possible position. I mean, he qualified ahead of Sainz, put himself into P3, and that second row for the race, which I was thinking about last year. McLaren was the main majority on the podium. I'm pretty sure it was Norris P2 and Piastri P3 for the 2023 Japanese Grand Prix. So, I mean, like, this seems to be a track that suits the McLarens well. And so I think they had some really high hopes for this season, and they showed it in qualifying. We are now moving on to the race, which also happened from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. for me, which I was paying attention. I actually got to watch this one. So I was there. I was live tweeting on the podcast's Twitter, made some funny memes, got recognized again by my favorite F1 YouTuber ever. I got on the funniest tweets of the Grand Prix again. You know, we're 2 for 2 right now. So that was fun, but turn 1 was really clean. No one crashed out on that race until turn 3. When Alex and Daniel touched and they both spun out pretty heavily into the tire barriers. It ended up red flagging the session, and they had to restart it on lap 3, I believe it was, by the time that they had kind of were like, hey, pull into the pits and that type of thing. I believe that the session stopped for maybe about 10 to 20 minutes. It was a pretty big crash, so, you know, the marshals had to redo the entire tire barrier. The FAI determined it was a racing incident, so none of the drivers were given fault for any of that. So now onto the teams. First, we have Red Bull. It was a Red Bull 1-2, back to our regularly scheduled program, people. The Ferrari delusions are over. We all have to come back down and realize what life is, and it's not fair. So, yeah, we did see some other race leaders, though. I personally quite like it when there are very different tire and pit stop strategies going on in the race. I feel like it gives us more excitement and competition between the racers and the teams, and when, you know, drivers are on different tire strategies compared to another person. And then also, I feel like during this race, it was a big thing of the either they were doing an undercut or an overcut. And we saw there was one moment, there was a 5-car pit stop. They all pulled in, and it was actually really cool to see how, it was kind of a little bit of like a mini race between the pit stop teams to see, who could get their car out first and safe as well too, because that's a big problem. Unsafe releases in the pit stops, but it was clean and it was good, and it was really cool to see. It was you don't see those things often. Moving on from the Red Bull 1-2, Ferrari had a 3-4. So they had a couple big battles. Leclerc was battling, I believe, Norris, Sainz, and Perez, and he didn't do his greatest. There were a couple big mess ups that, I think he slipped up on a couple corners, and he basically gave his position away to Checo, and then he did it again a couple laps later and gave up his position, or at least allowed Norris to get a lot closer during their battle. Sainz, on the other hand, he was doing really well in the beginning, and then, pit stops came around, so he fell back behind Leclerc, who was on a different tire strategy than him. And then towards the end of the race, he was given team orders basically to overtake Leclerc. Leclerc was told that his battle was not with Carlos Sainz, but with Lando Norris instead. I wonder what goes on through Ferrari's heads right now with, Charles Leclerc is their golden boy, and they have not given Carlos Sainz, a contract extension. They gave his seat to Lewis Hamilton. So it's one of those things where and Carlos Sainz, I look back, he has been on the podium for every single race this season, and technically he's beating Max Verstappen in that category. It was a funny stat for me to think about. He is outperforming, and I think he's just showing up and being like, this is what you're missing, while also at the same time being like, hey, other teams, I can perform, like, let's get some contract talk rolling, let's get it going, like, I need a place to stay for next season. So then on to technically we're kind of moving down in the constructors order. McLaren, they had a good race. It could have been better. They could have had a better strategy than what they did. They did well with combating Ferrari though, but it wasn't enough. Norris though had a great race. When you're solely talking about him, he had a great couple overtakes, especially one on, I believe it was turn 1 with Hamilton. He just pushed forward, and he was not letting Hamilton by. It was really cool to see him do that. Piastri did his best. I always feel like Piastri is gonna be something in a couple years. He was a rookie who did really well, and he seems to be forming really well with the car and with the team. And I feel like sooner rather than later, the lines will kind of blur within, who's number 1 and who's number 2 with the drivers, because Piastri can keep up with Norris. He can out-qualify Norris. We've seen it in the past couple races. He has the potential, and he has the skill set to equally compete and not just be, a number 2 in the McLaren seat. So I'm really interested. I'm slowly becoming more and more of a Piastri fan. It was also his birthday, I'm pretty sure, on Saturday or Sunday. I don't remember. I think he turned 23. But yeah, McLaren, this was definitely a track that was made for them, and I think that they botched up their strategy just a little bit. I think it could have just been cleaner and given them maybe a better chance. Maybe they could have gotten on the podium if it was a little bit better, but I kind of showed that Ferrari had a bit more pace than them, just slightly, a little bit, and then their strategy kind of messed up that, where they could have, overtaken. Who also battled with McLaren was Mercedes. We had a couple of times, like I talked about Hamilton. Lewis had a rough race. He was very vocal on the radio that he did not like the strategy and that he preferred it if they had changed it. They kind of were just like, hey, this is kind of a thing that's been happening due to the strategy and then the tire degradation. He just lost a lot of time. Russell kept himself in the top 10 and ahead of Lewis in qualifying and in the race where they finished. I really can't say much to Mercedes right now. I rewatched the race again and like did the race in 30 type of thing that F1 TV has. And I mean, like, they mentioned it, but they really only mentioned them when they were either one getting overtaken. I think Russell had one really good overtake. Oh yeah, he had one really good overtake at the end of the race. I think it was on one of the McLarens. I think it was on Lando. It was really clean and it was nice. And it was like a last second type of thing. But other than that, I don't have Mercedes. Just kind of seems to be falling behind a little bit, and it makes you worried for where they're gonna be going, because Aston Martin is catching up. And speaking of Aston Martin, Alonso finished really well, qualified, like I said, P5, P6 from where he was going to start. He was kind of just incognito, I think, in the race, like just was driving and finished well. Stroll didn't start off too hot. At one point, I was just flabbergasted. He came over the radio and was like complaining like a big baby, basically, about the engine. And I don't even remember what he said. And I was like, I'm not going to go look this up because I wasn't going to give him the time of day. It was like just a big complaining thing where he basically sounded like a baby when he was complaining about the car. But he didn't like the engine or something like that. Or he said the engine was super slow on the straights. But I believe it was because the cars were set up differently. So Alonso's car, I believe, was more set up for qualifying. So he was going to be faster in the straights, and they set up Stroll's car to be a bit more tuned for the race. And I guess it just didn't work out for how Aston Martin wanted it to go because, Stroll didn't place too hot. I believe, he ended up 12th. So, like, he made up some points. Like, he made up some spots. Not points. He didn't earn points. He made up some spots, but it just wasn't enough. So, as we mentioned earlier, Daniel DNF due to the racing incident with Albon. But speaking of RB, Yuki got a point at his home race. It was he had a great Yuki Tsunoda had a fantastic race. When I was watching the race in 30. Every couple, little highlights that they would do, it was like, oh, Yuki's got another overtake. Yuki's got another overtake. Oh my Lord. Like the announcers were so excited about it. But he made some really great overtakes on Gasly was one of them. And like one of the corners, I wouldn't have expected an overtake to come from there, but somehow he made it work. He did another great overtake on one of the Haas's. I don't remember who. But, I mean, like, he was doing actually, like, really decent, and the crowd was eating it up. So, then talking about Alex, out for the racing incident, and unfortunately, Logan spun out. I guess it was one of the leader laps. I would say between lap 40 and lap 53, maybe lap 40 and lap 50. He just spun out on the turn right before they go under the bridge. He spun out into a gravel trap, managed to pull himself out and keep going, but he ended up finishing last. It wasn't a very good event. It wasn't very good for the race for him or Williams. It's really quite concerning. I watched the post-race interview, and they brought on James Vowell, and he talked about the team is a very resilient team. They've been through a lot. It's just how much more resilience can you guys have? Like, I applaud that team so much for how they keep going and they keep pushing themselves forward, because like every race it just seems to be like another thing is knocking them down, But no, I applaud them. They keep pushing forward, and I believe they said that they're not going to have another chassis. Oh, I don't remember what race they said, but it's not soon. I think it's in the next maybe 3 or 4 races they'll have that third additional chassis. So we don't have another Alex Albon stealing Logan Sargent's car again. But we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. There was quite a big backlash about that. Speaking of another DNF, I personally was like, here we go again. Kick Sauber's got another horrible slow pit stop. No, it was just the team telling Zhou not to DNF. It was just the team telling Zhou to come in and retire the car. Apparently had a gearbox problem. So, but speaking of pit stops again, no, Bottas was in that. Remember I mentioned earlier the 5-car pit stop? Bottas was in that, and they actually did well. So I'm not going to say anything bad on them about that part. They actually had some decent pit stops, I feel like, this race, and they kind of redeemed themselves from the past 3, which were just horrible pit stops. Then on to another team who, it just seems to be one thing after the other for them too. Like Williams, Alpine is just not. At some point, you would think that you would see some type of improvement, and it's just not there. They're still not at points, and it just seems to be kind of at a standstill. And I don't even know. I mean, you may consider it less of a standstill, more maybe even as a decline. Like, they're losing staff. They're not qualifying well. If they do make it into Q2, they don't make it higher than P15. They're not getting points. Let me see where did Alpine finish? Okay, they finished P15 and P16, but also remember there were 3 cars out. So technically, if we were going to include Albon, Ricciardo, and Zhou in this, it's more than likely that they would have finished 19 and 18 or 18 and 17. So they're just not doing hot, and it's really starting to kind of become a concerning point because, in the beginning it was like, oh, Alpine better get their crowd together, but like it's just disappointing to see that they haven't made some results at all. So prayers for the Alpine team. I think they need it. And then the last team was Haas. Again, no points, but they had really good close battles with Tsunoda for the points, basically kind of almost the entire race. Didn't do so hot, but I mean, they already have 4 points this season, so I feel like they've made some pretty good headway in getting some points for the season, and compared to past seasons especially, they seem to have a bit better head on their shoulders, and they seem to understand what they're doing, and they seem to be having some decent qualifying pace, though I guess not here in Japan, but in other tracks that kind of suit them. They take advantage of what they got. Now onto the race prediction review. So like I said, top 5 for me and top 5 for Ariana. I had for the race Verstappen, Perez, Norris, Sainz, and Leclerc. And she had Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Norris, and Alonso. So she did beat me. She seems to be much better at this than I am. Lord knows she's just got that intuition in her. But no, that now puts her at 10 points and I'm at 9. But onto the actual race results. P1, Max Verstappen. 2, Perez. 3rd, Sainz. 4th, Leclerc. 5th, Norris. 6th, Alonso. 7, Russell. 8, Piastri. 9, Hamilton. 10, Tsunoda. 11, Hülkenberg. 12, Stroll. 13, Magnussen. 14, Bottas. 15, Ocon. 16, Gasly. 17, Sargent. And then a DNF from Zhou, a DNF from Ricciardo, and a DNF from Albon. And then onto the constructor standings. We have first place, Red Bull. They have 141 points. Behind them is Ferrari with 120. Third is McLaren with 69 points. Fourth is Mercedes with 34. Fifth is Aston Martin with 33. I told you they were catching up. Sixth was RB with 7. Seventh is Haas with 4. 8th, 9th, and 10th are Williams, Kick, Sauber, and Alpine, all with 0 points. I don't really have anything else to talk about. There wasn't much noise in the... Yes, I do. I lied. Okay. The podium when, oh my lord, what is her name? Kelly Piquet. Okay, we're going to get some really juicy stuff. So Kelly Piquet has a daughter, and she has a daughter with Daniel Kvyat. Now, if you have been watching F1 for a long time, you already know the story. But if you don't, my lord, is it juicy, and man, has that poor man has been a victim to Max Verstappen. Basically, Kelly Piquet had a daughter with Daniel Kvyat. Her name is Penelope, and she's like the cutest, sweetest thing ever, and she doesn't come to all of them, but she comes to a couple of the races. And Daniel Kvyat was in a Red Bull seat. And then someone took his Red Bull seat, and that man would be named Max Verstappen. And then after Max Verstappen took his Red Bull seat, Max Verstappen took his girlfriend, Kelly Piquet. And then basically Penelope very much so likes Max, and it's starting to see like Max Verstappen may have taken the role of father from Daniel Kvyat. Like this, Max Verstappen took this man's Formula One seat, girlfriend, and daughter. I think he's the number one victim. I think all of us F1 fans, we don't stand at all compared to what this man has had to go through due to Max Verstappen and Red Bull. But Penelope and Max had literally the cutest thing. When he was on the podium, she was like looking up and she was yelling like, "Maxie, Max!" Oh my gosh, it was so cute. I can't get over it. It was adorable. I want more cute content like that. But once again, I digress. There wasn't much else that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, the next track is going to be China, and we haven't had a race there since 2019. It was canceled the past 3 years due to COVID-19, or just them canceling themselves. But I only have a couple stats basically up about the Chinese Grand Prix. I truly am not familiarized with it. This basically is going to be like a new track personally for me watching. I wasn't watching Formula One in 2019. I didn't know about it or its existence. So it's going to be kind of like a new thing for me. I'm going to be experiencing it with kind of everybody else. So the first Grand Prix they ever held there was in 2004. And I believe it was every year there until 2019 or not. Maybe there was a gap. I think I saw something about a gap there. The number of laps is 56. So 3 more laps than what Japan was, meaning it's more of a shorter circuit. It's going to be April 19th through the 21st. And for my people on the East Coast, it's going to be once again a later race. And I mean later than what the Japanese race was. April 18th is going to be practice 1 from 11:30 to 12:30. And then, oh my gosh, guys. I just remembered this is a sprint weekend. It's our first sprint weekend of the 2024 season. Okay, I'm actually really excited about this. So practice 1's going to be on April 18th from 11:30 to 12:30. So once again, late. And then the sprint qualifying is going to be after the practice, about 3 hours after. From 3:30 to 4:14 is going to be sprint qualifying. And then sprint race is going to be later that Saturday from 11 to midnight. Qualifying is going to be from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. that Saturday. And then the race is going to be at 3 a.m. on Sunday. So other than that, I really don't have anything else to talk about. There wasn't anything juicy or anything like that. So, but I'm excited to watch the Chinese Grand Prix. And if you guys want, I try to live tweet for qualifying and for the race, so you guys can go on Twitter and look up Shift Happens F1 and we should come up, and if not, you can add the podcast at the end and it should be there. I live tweet, like I said, for the qualifying, and I try to keep you updated on who is out in Q1, Q2, and then the final results for Q3. And then I'm a bit more active during the races with giving out notifications about yellow flags or one of the major overtakes of the race. And then also, if you want to get a good laugh, I try to make some funny memes. And if you ever want to submit some memes to me and make me laugh, you can do so by DMing the Instagram and the podcast. So that was it. Thank you for listening to Shift Happens. Tune in next week to talk about all things cars and F1. Have a fantastic week, guys. Bye.